Hey, welcome back to the Love Fashionably podcast. I'm so excited that you have joined me once again on this Monday night or anytime that you are watching this. Thank you for being here. As always, we like to start here by giving, I guess the cool kids say giving their flowers too, but just saying a big thank you to BGTV Studios for hosting this podcast every week and for allowing all of this to happen. If you are not sure, you just kind of stumbled on this page, like what is BGTV Studios? It is a podcast network where there are podcasts happening all throughout the week. You can be sure to check out the website at bgtvstudios.com for more information and to see a full scheduled list of everything that is happening. We're also on social media, which is probably how you found this podcast, either on Instagram or Facebook, but you can also follow us on YouTube. That's where I kind of like to send everyone. So if you're wanting to kind of see like an archive, you can go to the YouTube page, the BGTV Studios YouTube page, and then you can search Love Fashionably and see the playlist for all of the podcasts that have been happening. We started this back in February, and it's kind of been on a journey, and I'm excited that you're here. We gonna kind of pick up a little bit where we left off last time. So we've kind of been on this kick here talking about Elisha and Elijah. And last time we were talking about like these like 4 different stages that they kind of traveled through. And that kind of last week, I was really kind of thinking about it more in like the zone of like leadership and authority and things like that. But the more I've thought on this, the more I really think these are just like 4 main stages that we all go through in life. And it's not just a one-time process. It's like an over and over process. I was thinking about it looking outside as I was kind of driving into the studio today. And I don't know where you are. It may be like, if you're like, New England area, you have like beautiful trees to look at. Here, we're just kind of starting to see a little bit of the trees turning from green to yellow here in Alabama. It's still hot outside, thus the short sleeve shirt in October. If you're like that where you live, then welcome. But I like to look at the seasons. Fall, like I've mentioned, is one of my favorite seasons. And when you look at the seasons and you think about it, like it's really kind of puzzling almost. Like, we have these 4 seasons that we go through, but have you ever stopped to think about how like we could have none? Like if Jesus and God spoken into existence, like he could have made them green all year round. Like they didn't have to change colors. They didn't have to go through this process of like dying every year and then regrowth. But I think it is a visual reminder for us of the way that we walk through life. If you'll read in the New Testament, there are so many times where Jesus is looking at nature. He's like pointing out trees and different things, and he's talking and giving examples and illustrations. And I think he left a permanent illustration for all of us to be able to see. And it's kind of relates to where we're going to pick up. So, where we started, and I'm going to just kind of read the verses again, but we were talking about where it was a time in Elijah's life where he was coming to the end of his life. He knew that his time on earth was done, and he had already passed his mantle to Elisha, and he was on this journey to basically leave the earth. And if you, spoiler alert, like he didn't die, like Jesus just came and got him and took him up to heaven. It's a miracle, a crazy story. You can read all about it, but we are going to just kind of look at one little part, and bear with me because it's like 18 verses, but it kind of sets us up, and we didn't look at this fully last time, and so I wanted to read all of this to kind of set us up on those 4 main stages. So we talked about Gilgal and Bethel last time, but the other 2 are Jericho and Jordan, then the Jordan River. And so you've probably heard of those before. If you grew up in church, then you've definitely heard about the last 2, but I kind of want to, again, kind of take us on this journey that they walk on and see how this kind of relates to our life. So again, like I said, we're going to start in 2 Kings chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 1. It said, when the Lord was about to take Elisha up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were traveling from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to Bethel. But Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you. Does that sound like anyone else? Just had to pause there for a second, because we have talked about this a little bit in the story of Ruth and Naomi. We've talked about that before, and if you've missed it, you can go back and watch that one. It's one of my favorite stories, but Ruth refused to leave Naomi's side, just as Elisha is refusing to leave Elijah's side. So they went on down together to Bethel. The group of prophets from Bethel came to Elisha and asked him, did you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today? Of course I know, Elisha answered, but be quiet about it. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to Jericho. But Elisha replied again, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you. So they went on together to Jericho. Then the group of prophets from Jericho came to Elisha and asked him, did you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today? Of course I know, Elisha answered. Are you seeing this? It's a repetitive thing that's happening here. He says, but be quiet about it. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has told me to go on to the Jordan River. But again Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you. So they went on together. 50 men from the group of prophets also went and watched from a distance as Elijah and Elisha stopped beside the Jordan River. Then Elijah folded his cloak together and struck the water with it. The river divided, and the two of them went across on dry ground. When they came to the other side, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken away. And Elisha replied, please let me inherit a double share of your spirit and become your successor. You have asked a difficult thing, Elijah replied. If you see me when I'm taken from you, then you will get your request, but if not, then you won't. As they were walking and talking, suddenly a chariot of fire appeared, drawn by horses of fire. It drove between the two men, separating them, and Elijah was carried by a whirlwind into heaven. Elijah saw it and cried out, my father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel. As they disappeared from sight, Elisha tore his clothes in distress. Then Elisha picked up Elijah's cloak, which had fallen when he was taken up. Then Elisha returned to the bank of the Jordan River. He struck the water with Elijah's cloak and cried out, where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Then the river divided. Elisha went back across, and the group of prophets from Jericho saw in the distance what had happened. So he followed this path, and then now he's turning around. He's following the path back home. So we're just going to kind of stop right there. Almost made it through that whole time. I didn't get tongue twisted. Elijah and Elisha. Those are like, the Lord could have really made them a little bit different, helped us out. Because successor and leader, same names. But talking about those 4 places that they go through on this journey, and like these basically 4 seasons in life that we kind of encounter. And the first one is Gilgal. And we talked about that last time. That's where we first see this kind of in Joshua with the people of Israel. They're coming out of the wilderness. They're getting ready to cross into the Jordan, into the promised land. And they stop at Gilgal, which there is a cutting where God says, no, you can't go into this next season with what you have now. There has to be like this leaving. And we talked about last time about how that cutting process in our life is usually God just taking things out of our life so that there's nothing in between us and him. Because the next step, or the next part of the process, is Bethel. And again, we talked about this with the story of Jacob, and how Jacob really is the one that set up Bethel, because when he's on the run from his brother, they've reconciled, but he goes and he wrestles with God in this place, and he says in Genesis 28, it says, let me find it right at the end. He says, Yahweh is here. He is in this place, and I didn't realize it. And then it says that he goes over, and he said, this place is a portal, the very gate of heaven. Early in the morning, Jacob took a stone he had under his head, set up a pillar, and anointed it by pouring oil over the top of it. He named that place Bethel, and that's in Genesis 28. And so this place this house of God. Bethel means house of God, this place of God where we can encounter God. And so there has to be this cutting or this season where God removes things out of our lives. He gets things out of the way, distractions or just things that are no longer good for us. Or sometimes, you maybe have like a group of friends that you feel like, as you're growing with the Lord, that maybe that's not like where He's called you to be for a moment. And it's not that they're bad people, that God doesn't still love them, but in order for you to grow, you may have to let go for a season. I've done this several times throughout my life, just to walk in obedience, but it's just maybe you're not as close for a season, but then I've found that God always kind of brings that back into His due time. But again, following that, the next one, or the third one, is Jericho. And so again, that's probably one, if you've been in church for a while, you've heard of Jericho, because again, with Joshua. So it's funny how the story of Joshua and the Israelites and Elijah and Elisha, and then we even see later in the New Testament, Jesus, they're all at these same places. These places are important. They're all throughout the Bible. Most of the time we don't realize it because we just think it's in one story or another. But then when you kind of take the pieces and put them all together, you can see how they're all kind of around the same general area. But Jericho, for the Israelites, represented the place of the promised land. So when they got into the promised land, Jericho is the first city that they overtook. You've probably heard of it because the walls fall down, but they fell down because they marched around the city and then they screamed after 7 days and the walls fell. And this place kind of can represent acceleration or growth in your life. Maybe like you're being planted, or you're God's telling you to like serve in a certain place. It's just kind of like a growth or a maturity as you begin to enter in what God has for you. As I mentioned in Joshua 6, that's where we see the Israelites take it. In Matthew 20, 29 through 34, we see that Jesus is in Jericho. It says that Him and the disciples left the town of Jericho. So He was on the road, and this is where He heals the two blind beggars that were on the road shouting for Him. But all these big cities and moments, but like Jericho kind of, again, growth, miracles type thing. So you have the cutting, then you have this relationship and encounter and moments with God. Then you have this growth. And for me, the last one, the Jordan, kind of represents like your promise or the promised land. Is the kind of the way that I see it, because the Jordan River, as we saw, Elisha and Elijah had to strike the ground to walk over on dry land. That wasn't the first time that the Jordan River parted. Back in Joshua, again, the Israelites crossed the Jordan River from the wilderness into the promised land. And again, just like He did the Red Sea, He parted it and they walked over on dry ground. We see that in chapter 4. Joshua even set up a pillar there. And he said, they were like, well, what does this mean? And he was saying, this is so that, I'll just read it. It says that, for the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and He kept it dry until you were all across, just as He did at the Red Sea. And He dried it up until you had all crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever. And so I feel like that's kind of what it represents for us as well. It's that reminder that the Lord's hand is powerful, and reminder of the fear of the Lord. It's not to be afraid, but to obey His commands, to follow what He's asking you to do, to know the truth, and to follow and walk in the truth. And so kind of as I thought of that, I just kind of wanted to finish that talk, because we kind of cut it off in the middle, and just share kind of that new perspective that I had on that this week, where there's, again, those four, really, if you want to say kind of 5 things, but, the Gilgal, the cutting away, Bethel, the house or the place of God, where those encounters, Jericho, where you have like breakthrough, those spiritual breakthroughs in our lives, the Jordan River, we enter into our promises fulfilled, and the promised land. And again, like I was saying, it's a seasonal thing. I think these things come in waves throughout our life. It's not like, oh, it's like a one-time journey type thing where you go through that process one time and then you're just good. I wish that's how it worked. It would be a lot easier. But that's just not how life works. There's these ebbs and flows, these ups and downs, and you walk through those different seasons, and you go through that, and then you have this moment of like peaceful rest in the promised land, and then it's time to start the process over again. Just as we can look outside and see that we're in the season of fall, we know winter's coming, which is the death or dying, like a cutting away season. And then you have, spring, which is where we get to see new life. And then you have summer, which is kind of like a restful, peaceful season. So kind of looking at even in those ways. Like I said, God leaves reminders for us all around. We just have to kind of choose to see them. But I thought that was kind of a unique perspective to where we can see all throughout the Bible how God is using these same places over and over again as a representation of just what he's wanting to always do in our lives and for us. So hope that was interesting, maybe a little encouraging to you, no matter where season you find yourself in. Hopefully, if you're like in a peaceful rest, you're like, great, now I'm about to go through that Gilgal season again. But sorry, unfortunately, it comes for us all. Too bad we don't get to pick and choose. That would be nice, but that's just not life. So anyway, I hope that you have a great rest of your Monday night. Thanks again for joining me here at the Love Fashionably podcast, and I'll see you again next week.